Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to do something that I don't do very often. I'm going to create some cards with some printed papers. Spellbinders just came out with a new line from Rosies Studios. It's the Bayfair line, and I have the card maker's kit as well as the coordinating die set. It's called Floral Spray. The card making kit comes with a 6-inch paper pad that has 40 sheets of printed papers, 20 designs, so you get 2 of each design in this paper pad. It also comes with a set of puffy stickers as well as a package of chipboard embellishments, and then there's some cute button embellishments. So there's a lot that you can play with, and you can make a bunch of great cards with it. They even have a scrapbooker's kit for those that love doing scrapbooking, and there's also a coordinating solid cardstock paper pad with all of the colors that are used in here. So if you wanted to create a bunch of things with either one of the kits, the solid cardstock pad is a great one to use to create different pieces or mats with it. Now I have a few of the printed papers that I'm using to die cut some florals with, and I'm also going to use some of these floral papers for the backgrounds for my cards. So the first thing I'm going to do is just pick out the papers that I want to use, and I tend to gravitate to the floral papers for doing these backgrounds, especially with the floral die cuts on them. But if you don't necessarily want floral die cuts on floral papers, there's also a lot of generic papers in this pad that you can use. This blueprint here is one that I used to create some die cuts out of. Because the floral in these prints have some blue flowers on them, I used this. I like some of the subtle prints for doing different die cuts when I'm creating. Now these printed papers aren't super thick, so I do add them to some white cardstock before I do my die cutting, just to give them a little bit of extra thickness for those die cuts. So you can see when I'm flipping through this paper pad here, there is a lot of choice with patterns. All the colors coordinate together, so it doesn't really matter which pattern you choose, they're going to work well together. This green one is another one that I used to die cut. I did a bunch of leaf die cuts with it, as well as using some solid Spellbinders cardstocks for both my die cuts, as well as some mats and other elements on the front of the card. I will try to tell you all the colors that I'm using while I'm using them, but they will be listed in the supply list down below. But just remember that there is a solid cardstock pack that coordinates beautifully with it, that if you felt like working with one of the kits, that solid cardstock pack is a perfect companion to it, because then you don't have to do any guesswork or try to match the colors yourself. So for these papers, the ones that I wanted to die cut, I took a piece of 6x6 cardstock and I put my wet adhesive, my Barely Art glue in the fine tip bottle, all around the edges as well as throughout that cardstock. And I crisscrossed it going both ways to try to get a good amount of glue on there to attach that printed paper to the cardstock, so there wasn't going to be a whole lot of bare spots, and it just gave that cardstock a nice thickness to it, which was perfect. So for my first card, I have this floral print here with a dark background, and I'm using some Dahlia cardstock. I'm going to cut a few mats or focal points with the Mirrored Arch labeled dies. So I have one that I'm cutting out of the Dahlia cardstock and one that I'm cutting out of white cardstock. This is just going to give a focal point for the center of my card to add my sentiment and for my florals to go around. Now I love die cut florals. I love arranging them on cards to give it some extra texture. It's just one of the things that I love doing with card making and with floral dies, and they work perfectly with these papers because of the florals. But if it's not your cup of tea, you don't have to do that. There are so many embellishments in the embellishment kits or packages that come with this card maker's kit that you could use those instead. And like I said before, there is a scrapbooker's kit, and I know those come with a few extra packages as well, that you don't necessarily have to do your own die cutting if that's not your cup of tea. It's definitely my cup of tea, so I'm going to be doing a bunch of it for these cards that I'm creating. And I did a bunch of the florals die cutting before time so that I wasn't wasting time in this video doing it. It's going to be done exactly the same way as I'm doing the die cuts of these other focal pieces. What I tend to do, if I'm doing a lot of die cuts at once, I will just pick one sheet of paper, put all my dies down, put the paper on top, and then put it through. And then I will just organize them. And my die cuts here are organized. I have one of my Craft Stacks trays for the larger florals. I have one of them with some of the leaves and stems. And I have this little tray here. This is one that I got from a dollar store a long time ago with some laser woodcut pieces in it. And it works perfectly for organizing some of the smaller florals in these die cuts. If I were to be doing this all on my own without videotaping it, I would just have them all mixed together because I wouldn't mind thumbing through that. But I do have them organized just for this video, so there's less time wasted trying to find the die cuts that I'm looking for. I put all of the same shape of die cuts in each one of those sections. So there's just different colors of exactly the same shape. For all my assembly, I'm going to use that same Bearly Art glue in the fine tip bottle because I like the fact that I can use it for assembling really tiny die cuts like this, as well as assembling my cards in larger pieces. I can pick and choose how much glue I need for each particular thing that I'm gluing together. For these smaller die cuts, a jewel pick or a jewel picker is going to be very handy to place those die cuts on top of your glue. And I'm just doing dots of glue here so that I don't accidentally get too much to it. But that jewel picker makes it really, really easy to lift up those pieces of cardstock and place them. Sometimes I will need to take my fingers and adjust them a little bit, but it works perfectly for the tiny, tiny pieces. For my florals, I've done this in many videos before. I like to take my fingers and I just curl the petals of my flowers just to give them a little bit of extra dimension. It makes them pop up or rise up off of the card a little bit. It's something that flattens in the mail if you were to put it in an envelope. So it's not dimension that won't go down, but it just gives it a little bit more texture and more dimension. And it's something that I really, really like. So I'm going to create 4 cards in this video with different patterned papers on my backgrounds and then using my floral die cuts, and they're all going to be 4 different designs. For all of my cards, I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base, and I just did a white card base for these, nice and simple, and it coordinates beautifully with the printed papers. I have a solid colored mat that is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and then my printed paper is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So those sizes are the same for all of them. For the pieces in the center of my card, my little focal points, when it comes to the die cuts, it just depends on the size of die that I chose. For the ones where I just have cardstock strips, I'll tell you at the time what the size of those are. So when I have my cardstock on my card base drying, my main focal points, as well as my printed papers over the back, I like to lay my die cuts out on top of the acrylic block that I have on top of it drying, just to place everything so that I know I have the arrangement that I have in my head. And then when I have everything placed where I want it to be, I can lift up that acrylic block, move it to the side, and start gluing things down and know where I want to put it and know how it's going to look. And again, I'm using that same liquid glue to glue everything in place. And the nice thing, especially when you're doing an arrangement like this with the liquid glue, is you have a little bit of time for wiggle room. So it starts to grab somewhat quickly, but not so quickly that you can't just lift something up and tuck it underneath if you want to tuck it underneath. I will typically put the largest flowers and then start working my way out, or I'll know where I want that focal flower and then work my way out. So for my sentiment on this card, I'm taking my puffy stickers, and there's a word loved in here, and it's a beautiful gold. So I'm taking that, I'm going to put that on the center of the card. Now there's little slivers in the centers of those, the L, the O, the E, and the D. So I took my die pick and I just picked that out to make sure that those centers were out. And then there's a sticker called, it just says special to me. And I thought that went well with the loved. I love how these sets have some nice bold words as well as kind of some sub-sentiment. So there's a lot of choice in there and you can really customize it to your liking. For the centers of my flowers, I'm just finishing it off with a little bit of stickles for a bit of sparkle. I always love how it adds just that touch of sparkle, that little bit of texture on there. So that is the completed first card here. For my second card, I'm using a strip of the Dahlia cardstock and I'm putting it through my Flower Frenzy 3D embossing folder. I like to mist it with my Distress Mister so that those paper fibers are slightly moist and they just push into all of those nooks and crannies. So because of that, I will need to set that aside to dry. The piece of Dahlia cardstock that I did the 3D embossing with is 5¼ inches long and 1½ inches wide. And then I have a piece of floral cardstock that is left over from cutting down the pieces for my card fronts. And it is 2 inches wide by that same 5¼ And I'm using that as a stripe down the left side of my card. So I'm gluing down my solid cardstock here, which is that Dahlia one again. I'm gluing down my printed paper, which is a stripe. So for my die cuts, I used fern for some of the leaf die cuts. And then for some of the floral die cuts, I used that Dahlia. I also used pink sand, I used beeswax, and then I used cosmic sky, as well as raindrop. Those are all the solids that I've used for these cards, but there are a few other colors that you could or that would work with them. I just didn't have those solid colors of cardstock, and I wanted to keep to the solid colors that were Spellbinders cardstock for this video. So there are other colors that will go with it. I just used the same color palette for all of the cards and they worked really well. I'm going to use one of the chipboard stickers for my sentiment for this card, and it's just a circle that matches the Dahlia cardstock really, really well. It says hello friend, and then it has a gold rim around the outside. I'm going to use one of the flower die cuts from the Floral Spray die cut there, and what I was pointing out is I didn't really look at the front of the package when I was die cutting. This shape looked like leaves to me, so I die cut them out of green. But when you look at the bunch or the cover of the dies, it shows it in a blue for the flower. I could have recut them, but I actually really liked them as leaves as well. So that gives you two options to do with that same die. You could use them as leaves underneath the flowers, or you could die cut them in one of the colors of your florals and have it for that. There are little stems as well that I die cut, and there's a few different ones. There's a couple of short ones, and then there's some longer ones. So I like the fact that you get some choice here. It means that you can really customize your florals to match exactly what you're wanting to do. So I glued those florals down to the bottom right of my card and then put that hello friend chipboard embellishment on top of it. And then I took a little bit of stickles and put them in the center of the florals on my embossed cardstock. This is a very, very simple design, so it's not complicated, but it has so much texture to it, and I love the floral die cuts with it. And I really love the fact that that die cut or that die set that goes with it are all the same florals that are in the prints. So they coordinate absolutely beautifully, and they work really, really well with that printed paper. So for my third card, I pulled out my Better Press system and I chose one of my sentiments from the New Beginnings Timeless Sentiment set. This is another one that was released earlier this month, and I am putting it onto some Better Press cardstock with some distress ink. So I'm using Rustic Wilderness distress ink, and it works really, really well with the green fern cardstock die cuts that I have. And it says, I think you're pretty great. And I'm also going to use the Smile larger sentiment from the puffy sticker set, and I thought that worked really well with the I think you're pretty great. So once I have my press plate inked with the distress ink, I can put the clear plate on the base of the Better Press system, put it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 machine, and that will transfer the ink over as well as press that into the cardstock. For die cutting it, I'm going to use some dies from the Essential Modern Ovals die set. It works perfectly with the width of this sentiment, and it's just a little bit of a unique oval from traditional ovals for the front of the cards. And by using this, it doesn't cover as much of my floral printed paper on the background of my card. So I chose two of the dies from the set, one a little bit smaller, which is going to be the sentiment in the Better Press cardstock, and then one a little bit bigger that's going to be in that fern cardstock here. Now this fern cardstock, I'm going to use it as my larger mat behind my printed paper on the base of my card, but I'm going to die cut this modern oval out of the center of it. It's just a way to get a little bit more mileage on your cardstock. Because the printed paper is going to be right over top of that fern cardstock, you're never going to know that anything was die cut out of it, and it's just a way to stretch your supplies a little bit better. So I'm going to glue that fern mat down that has that oval die cut out of it, and you can see as soon as I put this printed paper down, you can't see where that oval is cut out because that paper is opaque. Now, I did make sure to die cut that out of the center, so I knew that I wasn't going to have part of the opening coming out from behind that floral paper, as well as the fact that when I glued it to the front of my card, it was going to be in about the same area that I die cut it out of. So I glued that fern piece onto that printed paper, and then I'm going to glue that printed or that Better Press sentiment set on there and put that acrylic block on there just to hold everything in place while it dries. And I do this often. If you've seen any of my previous videos, I do this pretty much every single time. It just makes everything lie flat. It frees up my hand. I don't have to hold anything, and I know that everything has good contact. And especially when I want to lay die cuts over top of it, it gives me a little bit of time with free hands while I'm waiting for something to dry to just plan my next steps. So I have an idea of which florals I want to use here. I'm just going to layer them on top of each other, create an arrangement that I like, pulling all the different die cuts out of my different trays here. And these Craft Stacks trays are so handy to craft with. They can stack on top of each other really, really easily. So it is perfect for organizing everything. And what I was showing that moment ago is there are two die cuts that are very similar in shape to each other. One is very symmetrical and one is a little bit more flowy and fluid a little bit. On the front of the die cutting or die set, that more symmetrical one is on the larger 5-petaled flower, and the one that's a little bit more fluid, a little bit more flowy is on this particular flower. My brain wanted the symmetrical one when I was creating this, so that is what I used, but you really can pick and choose which one you want for the look that you're going for. So by having those all die cut in different colors, you can easily pick and choose and layer them on top of each other. And like I said, get the look that you're going for. So I put the largest of the flowers down, tucked my leaves behind there. Again, I'm using that same glue. And I'm going to put the larger focal points first before I start taking the smaller ones and then just tucking them in the areas that I want them to. I have some little tiny flowers here. I did them in blue. It kind of echoes the blue flowers that are in the printed paper that is on the back of the card. And with these florals, I just love the fact that you can tie them in together and coordinate them together that easily. So once these are all glued in place, I decide that I want one extra floral down the left side of my oval. So I will layer that together. There's a few different die cuts that will layer on top of each other, creating buds. And this one I thought looked fairly similar to this open flower here. So I chose to do that in the same colors. And once I have that done, I can put that on one of my stems. Now the stems are curved in different directions, but you can easily just flip that stem over if you want it to be curved in an opposite direction of the way that it is die cut. So it's an easy way to just change the direction of it. And in an arrangement like this, you really don't know, or you can't really notice if you're seeing the top of the die cut or the bottom of the die cut. Now I originally glued it on this particular stem and then found a different one that I liked better. So I just pulled that off of that stem, put it on the new one, and I'm going to let that dry for a few seconds before I add it to my card. And while waiting that few seconds, I thought maybe I wanted to use one of the dragonfly embellishments in the puffy stickers sheet. I decided not to, but you could easily add that if you wanted. So I'm going to pull off that smile sticker, and it's a nice beautiful metallic gold, and it works really, really well with the brushed gold cardstock from Spellbinders. I didn't use any of that brushed gold cardstock for doing any of my mats, but you could certainly swap out any of these colors for that and it would look absolutely beautiful. So this flower here, I cut my stem or ripped my stem a little bit shorter because it's being tucked under an arrangement and glued in there. You're never going to know it was shortened or ripped shorter. So an easy way to just trim something to tuck it underneath something. I have some platinum stickles here that I'm putting on the center of the flowers. It's going to tie in beautifully with the gold in that smile sticker and just coordinate that better. Now, for these cards, I don't put any stickles on my printed papers for my background, but you certainly could if you wanted to add a little bit of sparkle to that as well. I just chose to only keep them within the die cuts. So there is that finished card, and now we're ready to work on the fourth card. Now, I made a mistake when I was recording this, and I forgot to press record for the first part where I glued down those mats or those pieces onto my card base. But I realized it well enough to show you what I had done with these leaves. Now, when you look at the printed paper that I used on this particular card, The leaves are darker on one side and have a layer that's a little bit lighter on the other side. So in order to echo that look, I took some of the leaves that I had done with the printed papers and some that I had done with the solid papers, and I cut them down the center. And there's actually a cut line already down the center from die cutting that goes around most of it. You just need to snip it at the top and the bottom of that leaf, and then you can glue it onto the other die cut. And it just adds a two-tone to that leaf, and it coordinates beautifully with that printed paper below. Now I have a stripe that goes along the width of my card here. So it is 4 inches in length, both pieces. And my white stripe is 1 inch wide. My Dahlia one that is behind the white one there is 1 1/8 inch. So you only see a tiny little bit of it. I knew I was going to have florals that were a lot of pink, so I only wanted to have just a touch of that color there. So once again, for my florals, I'm going to do the same thing as I've done before. This time I didn't put it on top of the acrylic block because I had a good idea what I wanted to do. I took one of the puffy stickers that says Good Times and I put it in the center of my white stripe, and then I started doing my florals around it. I did have a larger of the 5-petaled flower that I had prepared to go on here. I ended up not using it because it was a little bit too big. These florals I prepped off screen because they are the same that I've been using throughout the video, so the prep for them was not any different. The only die cut with a little bit of different prep was the leaves, which is what I just showed you. And again, it's not a detail that you need to use. You could just use a solid leaf if you wanted. It's just a way to get something a little bit different, add a little bit of extra detail to those die cuts. And like I said, it echoes the print on the back, so it coordinates beautifully with that. So once I have those 2 focal flowers in there, then I tucked in my leaves, and then I started tucking in some of those smaller florals. By going from the largest to the smallest, you can easily tuck smaller things into fill areas. You don't want to do the smaller ones first and then start putting in the larger ones, because likely you would cover up something that you wanted to be able to see. So I tend to work from largest to smallest when I do this, or at least have an idea where I want my larger elements so that when I do put my smaller elements, I don't cover anything there. And you can see how I'm going back and forth between the different arrangements. We've got 2 on this one. I tend to work, I'll do the largest elements, then the leaves, and then tuck in the smaller ones. And it'll typically be the same elements that I'm doing until I have them done before I work on the next elements. And those smaller ones really tie in with the print on the back, as well as fill in different areas from the arrangements. Now, once again, I put a little bit of stickles on the centers of the flowers. If you wanted to get creative, you could do the stickles or dots of stickles on the floral background, or you could even put some around your flowers if you wanted. So once those florals were done, I thought it would be fun to add another dimensional element. So I took the blue butterfly from the Twilight Butterflies dimensional sticker set. This one pops up all on its own, but it has a solid sticker behind it, and it has a beautiful holographic outline. It coordinates beautifully with that paper and just adds a 3rd focal point for the front of that card. I absolutely love the way these cards turned out. I love the fact that the die cuts match the printed papers so well, so it's really easy to come up with 4 different cards. And if you look at the leftover supplies, there are still so many leftovers to create so many more cards, and I plan to create some more cards with this. So many printed papers that are left, and I didn't even touch on these buttons, so I'm definitely going to have to create another project with these and use some more of these papers as well as more of these embellishments and the die cuts. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. I hope you have a fantastic day.